Just missed it. Is that why they call it the L?
The time has come at last to head to the Windy City, one of America's classic rail capitals. It's time to go and explore Chicago. And what a better way to start our trip than with an airport rail link straight from O'Hare. Should get us to the city pretty quickly, right? Well, not so fast. Here we'd get exposed to the first of many slow zones on the Chicago L right now. Our first sign of the state the CTA finds itself in right now. Which is a real shame. There were times when we were moving even slower than the cars on the highway that were stuck in traffic. But no matter, we made it to the city at last, and the first port of call was to ride around the Chicago Loop at sunset. This is the most symbolic part of the L system, with 5 lines converging in this 8-station circular track right through the heart of Chicago's skyline. Elevated metros and downtowns are increasingly rare around the world, so riding on Chicago's is quite fun. Though with all the lines coming together, you do require some very complex junctions and signaling patterns, which can sometimes lead to trains sticking around and waiting for a couple minutes. But of course, the loop is only the tip of the iceberg on the CTA rail system. And despite the CTA being so poorly managed recently and the system clearly on life support, it still has a lot of charm. So today we're gonna go explore all 8 lines on the Chicago L, try and find one interesting thing about every line, and I'll also rank every line in a tier list style. First on the agenda, we have the Purple Line. Since we're starting in the morning, we can take advantage of its weekday rush hour service in which it goes beyond Howard Station all the way through to the Loop, including acting as an express service along the Red Line. After weaving our way through downtown a little bit, we end up on the North Side Main Line, which second to the Loop is probably the most important rail infrastructure in all of Chicago. It's a quad-track corridor that mainly carries the Red Line, but it also has Purple Line express trains, which we're on right now, as well as the Brown Line for a little bit. The tracks here have been undergoing some heavy renovation, which is still in the works, but has produced some fruit recently, with most notably the Belmont flyover that carries the Brown Line, which we will get to ride on later in this video. Once the Brown Line leaves, the Purple Line Express really kicks in, as we skip a total of 11 Red Line stops between Belmont and Howard. We're continuing on to where the Purple Line runs exclusively, which is this quaint little stretch in the town of Evanston. I got off at Foster Station, which is right next to Northwestern University, which is also colored purple. In fact, it's believed that the line was colored purple because of the university. And just like many American college towns, this is a really fun place to walk, even in the cold of 40-degree Fahrenheit weather at the time of filming. And best of all, they have an Insomnia cookies here. I walked all the way to Davis Station, the next stop down, which incidentally also has Metro service from the UP North Line. And by service, I mean hourly trains off peak, which is pretty standard for Metro, but hey, it's something. Overall, this part of the Purple Line is pretty great, and the express service is very useful as well, though I often found Purple Line express trains to be very delayed or sometimes even cancelled, which really puts into question the whole express thing. You might as well just get the Red Line at that point. That being said, the Purple Line gets C tier. I then headed back to Howard to transfer to the Yellow Line, also known affectionately as the Skokie Swift, the shortest line on the L system. Some might wonder why it's even there, but with the help of some federal aid, the line proved to be a success with the locals. Now, you might notice on this line that you can see some overhead catenary. That's because this used to be a mainline rail corridor that was powered by overhead wires. Well, obviously the CTA uses third rail, so that's how these trains get powered now. And here we are at the end of the line, Dempster-Skokie, but unusually for what's ostensibly a metro line, this station has grade crossings. I turned around straight back to Howard, and surprisingly, more than a few people actually got onto this train, which, given that it's off-peak on a Wednesday, that was great to see. So, for the Yellow Line's ranking, it's kind of unfair to rank it compared to other lines because it is so different, but it clearly is a useful service that people still count on, so I'll just put it in C tier. I can't be bothered to. And back at Howard again, we get onto the Red Line now, heading south once again on the North-South Main Line. Now, the Red Line is one of the 2 major trunk lines on the CTA system, which doesn't use the loop and instead has its own dedicated subway in downtown, And here we are at that subway at Jackson Station. You might notice on a CTA map, the red and blue lines, the two major trunk lines might I remind you, do not have a physical connection. Well, it turns out that you can actually transfer between those lines within the paid area at Jackson, using this underground tunnel that features red and blue tiling to symbolize the two lines. I always love when stations do this. It reminds me of Green Park Station in London. Back to the Red Line platforms, the State Street subway, as it's known, has a very long continuous platform, as does the Blue Line subway to be fair, but the Red Line one is slightly longer, and you can walk all the way to multiple stations, including ones that no longer exist, without leaving the fare system. Rather ominously, just as I pulled into the end of the platform, at Lake Station, the signal turned green, and what do you know, seconds later, a train arrived. So now to rank the Red Line. Well, I enjoyed riding it. There are some pretty neat underground stations beyond the State Street section of the subway, and I never had to wait too long for a train. It's a very high ridership line, there isn't really much wrong with it, and it's about to get really modernized. I'm gonna put it in A tier. It's my second favorite line on the Chicago L. But now, for what might just be my most favorite, as we transfer to the Brown Line. And yeah, I'll spoil it right now, the Brown Line is going into S tier. It'll be pretty obvious why when we talk about it. This line starts in the loop, just like the Purple Line Express, and then runs into the North Side Main Line before branching off and the Belmont flyover, which we are now riding on. It then goes to some pretty neat neighborhoods and ends at Kimball. Because the Brown Line uses the counterclockwise tracks on the loop compared to most lines using the clockwise track, it can actually run at a very high frequency compared to the other loop lines. But the real gem of this line is its neighborhoods, such as here at Western, which is one of 5 stations in the entire network that are named Western, we go to Lincoln Square. A really classy neighborhood that I enjoyed spending some time in, and also had some great food at Jerry's. Brown Line's frequency meant that I never had to wait too long, so what's not to like here? Easy S tier. And one bonus fact, this is the closest line on the L to the famous Chicago Rat Hole. The nearest station is Paulina, you walk west around 10 minutes and you'll find it. I only took one very quick photo and left because, come on, people live here, you shouldn't be disturbing them. The 5th line on our tour will be the Orange Line. We're going to change at Quincy Station, which has plenty of nice wooden structures, and we get onto the newest line on the L system. It has the newest tracks and serves as the second airport of Chicago, Midway Airport, traveling along freight right-of-ways. But that's where the positives end, sadly. Frequency is okay, but nothing special, and the land use on this line is pretty sad. Such as here at 35th and Archer, there just isn't really anything to see. Except, of course, for a drive-through Dunkin' Donuts, my first time ever seeing one in the US. It's not all bad news on the Orange Line, as here at 35th and Archer as well, we get to visit McKinley Park, which is a nice calming place to relax. So then, how to rank the Orange Line? Well, it depends on what you like. It's pretty frequent and reliable, though it has no land use. It's a good airport rail link, though the airport station is pretty far from the actual terminal. All of that being considered, let's put it in B tier. Before we leave the Orange Line though, here's a pretty neat view on our way back of the Chicago skyline. And then it's a change of trains at Roosevelt to get to the Green Line. And this line does have quite a lot to see as the CTA tries its best to advertise to you. Though we're not going to any of these places. Instead, I've come to the second best IIT in the world to check out a tube. Yeah, I know, it seems boring, but it has a practical use. The rail line goes right above the campus's student union building, which obviously you don't want trains to be making a lot of noise there. So the tube is meant to reduce some of the noise. Though I couldn't really hear much of a difference. And if anything, the music from the frat houses nearby was almost as loud as the trains. And the Green Line is so infrequent, so delayed, and so full of track issues that trains don't even come that frequently. Yeah, I'm gonna say it, the Green Line is the worst line on the CTA system. With its 2 branches, you have places that are served every 24 minutes, which is just terrible for places that are already low-income transit deserts. Easy F tier for the Green Line. But things fortunately get better as I'm about to transfer onto a Pink Line train. Wait, this Pink Line's a bit orange. Is it a Dunkin' Donuts train? Is it a lesbian train? Anyway, the Pink Line is the newest line to get its own color. It used to be a branch of the Blue Line. And much like the Orange Line, it serves Chicago's southwest. And also, much like the Orange Line, there isn't much to see here. But I got off at Kedzie, and this is where we try out one of CTA's buses. Now, I'm going to be visiting a lot of cities on this channel in the future, and I'm going to try and talk about buses a lot more, because if we're being honest, a city's transit network is only as strong as its buses. Especially with the L network being so radial, suburban trips are often faster with buses than trains. So here I am waiting for the CTA 52 bus, which is operated by a Nova bus, a very nice surprise to me given I was so used to Gilligs and New Flyers back in California. The Nova bus actually feels a little bit better, but it's not much. And if there's one thing I wish CTA wouldn't do, it's having the bus stop at literally every single block. It just makes the trip slower for everyone. But we're here at the Little Village, which is a very important Mexican cultural district. The village is symbolized by this beautiful arch. I then got back on the 52, where we see this neat little sign that tells you which rail lines are accessible by bus, proving just how important the buses are to feed the rail network. I skipped past the Pink Line station though and made my way to the Blue Line station at Kedzie, and this is just really sad. These highway median stations are terrible. And yes, I know Art and Wilmot have highway median stations too, but these ones just feel even worse. But before we get on the Blue Line, I have to rate the Pink Line, of course. The frequency isn't great compared to other loop lines. There's not too much going on as far as land use, and most annoyingly, they only run 4-car trains. It's a D tier for the Pink Line. But let's go ride the line that it used to be a branch of, the Blue Line. We saw the Blue Line on our way out of O'Hare, which had tons of slow zones, but the Forest Park branch is even worse than the O'Hare branch. But we're gonna ride through and go back to the O'Hare branch to get off at Logan Square, which is actually an underground station not in the city center. And we come to our second neighborhood, whose name is L something Square. This one's also pretty cozy, but it's not quite as good as Lincoln Square. But this is where our tour of the CTA L system will end. And for the Blue Line, I'm gonna match its letter with B tier. It's a similar role to the Red Line, being a major trunk, though it also has O'Hare on it, but given all the slow zones, it just was more delayed than the Red Line, so it goes down a tier. But yeah, this is where we end our tour of the Chicago L. I hope you enjoyed it and got to see that despite the system clearly needing some support, it still has some really cool places, and it just really goes to show that with just a bit of funding and proper management, the Chicago L could get back on track because it has the bones of something very special. This is not my only video in Chicago though, I have 2 more coming out. One will be a trip report on Metro, and one will be a rather fun game involving the L. I'll catch you then.